So good morning, everyone. I'm Professor Henrietta Moore. I'm the founder and director of the Institute for Global Prosperity at University College London. Welcome to this wonderful site of UCL East and this very beautiful building. And welcome also to the launch of the Citizen Prosperity Index and a number of other wonderful publications and metrics which are around the room that you can look at today. So the IGP focuses on how to improve the quality of people's lives worldwide. We work in Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe, and here in the UK. What we're interested in is determining, defining, and delivering plausible pathways to prosperity, to improve the quality of people's lives everywhere. We've been doing this for a number of years, and since I founded the IGP in 2015, we immediately set out on a transformational agenda to redesign prosperity for the 21st century and to change the conventional measures that usually focus on economic growth, job creation, employment, and household income. We were much more interested in what really matters for local people and local communities. What's well-being for them? What's flourishing for them? How can we understand those processes? How can we rethink prosperity for communities in London? So why London? Well, the reason that sometimes people think that London is a very wealthy city. It certainly is a very wealthy city, but it's not a very prosperous city. There are many communities in London that are doing very, very poorly. And one of the reasons for that is because the economic model that we've been running for the last 40 years or so is failing us. It's failing us quite consistently. And we need to address those issues. So the Citizen Prosperity Index is the UK's first citizen-led, co-produced prosperity measure. It's based on the first wave of data from the Prosperity in East London 2021 to 2030 longitudinal study. And this is tracking prosperity over 4,000 households in 15 hyperlocal areas of East London and assessing the impacts of large-scale and long-term urban regeneration. Now, the goal of the study, and this is very tricky when you've been given a brief by your team and told you have to say certain things, and you've got to hold this in your hand and a piece of paper in the other. Anyway, but the most important thing that we're trying to do here is to understand how prosperity gains from regeneration investments are shared within and between local communities, with a particular focus on who is benefiting and doing well and who is in difficulty. And secondly, to explore whether there are observable differences in levels of prosperity between specific areas, such as planned new neighbourhoods in regeneration areas or established areas close to those regeneration sites. The index represents a new way of undertaking rigorous academic, policy-relevant research that reflects local lived experiences and is a new way of conceptualizing and measuring prosperity based on long-term research about what prosperity means for local communities. In other words, it is a huge academic study that embodies the values, principles, and strategies of the Institute for Global Prosperity. The index is also a step change in the way prosperity is to be understood, measured, and acted on by government, businesses, and civil society partners. Now, at the IGP, we work always, everywhere in the world that we work, and here in London is no different. We work with citizen scientists who are members of the community trained to lead on the research aims, to redesign prosperity from their perspective, from the bottom up, if you like. And it places local residents and organizations in charge of determining and designing prosperity as they see it in their lives for them. Now, last year we launched the UCL Citizen Science Academy, which certifies those who have trained in research methods to work as part of university research teams. And this transforms the way research is being conducted by directly involving citizens and communities. But it does something more than that. We actually accredit at UCL the citizen scientists who work for us. And what that means is it fundamentally changes the relationship of the university to the communities that surround it. And as I've said many times when I have been talking about this, that change is the biggest change to university education since universities admitted women. It is a hugely important step that has been taken by UCL here, and we're very pleased to be able to lead on that. And this, I think, is the kind of social innovation we need for driving prosperity in the UK. Now, the Prosperity in East London study, the longitudinal study, has been co-designed and co-funded with the London Prosperity Board, which I chair. And this includes members such as the GLA, the LLDC, Royal Docks, the Office of National Statistics, various businesses, community organisations like Compost London, and boroughs across London, including all the growth boroughs, such as Newham, Hackney, Tower Hamlets, and Waltham Forest. The London Prosperity Board has been instrumental, fundamental, in testing new ways of working and developing new citizen-led prosperity metrics. And that way of working and those metrics have now been adapted from the work here in London for the IGP's global work in Kenya, in Tanzania, and in Lebanon, and of course in other parts of the UK. So I just want to close by saying that our work at the IGP is not possible without the dedication, commitment, and support from all our partners, both past and present. All of you have worked with us across the last 10 years, and I would like to thank you most sincerely for everything that you have done and for your support and commitment. In this moment, we are starting a new phase of partnership, working to share insights and embed citizen-led thinking on prosperity into mainstream policy across a range of sectors. And so it gives me very great pleasure today to announce we have new London Prosperity Board members. We love having new London Prosperity Board members, and these are the East Bank, the BBC, and the NHS North East London. So a key finding from our work in East London is that secure livelihoods are consistently identified by communities as the foundational component of a prosperous life. And you will see and possibly hear from Mayor Fiaz in a moment how insecurity is becoming embedded in life in East London and how difficult it is as a practitioner to address those issues and how important a study like this is for supporting the work that needs to be done at the local level. So I would say, in conclusion, that the Citizen Prosperity Index report released today demonstrates how a place-based and a whole systems approach to prosperity, coupled with these new collaborative partnerships I've described and ways of working with citizens and multiple stakeholders, can lead to a better understanding of what constitutes a secure and prosperous life for all. Now, I am very honoured to welcome our keynote speaker, Mayor Rokhsana Fiaz, who is the Mayor of Newham. And she's going to talk about how she sees this work from her perspective. Newham is a long-term collaborator with the IGP, and it's wonderful to have her here today. So Mayor Fiaz was elected the Mayor of Newham in May 2018, and since her election, she has been leading a transformative and radical agenda in Newham, reflecting a series of manifesto commitments to address inequality and poverty, invest in young people to widen opportunities, embedded the community wealth building as the economic approach adopted by her council, and increased participatory democracy, and also to respond to the climate emergency. She's also been leading one of the most ambitious and genuinely affordable housing programs in London. And under her leadership, Newham has become the first council in the country to make health, happiness, and well-being of its residents the key indicator of economic success. And as an advocate for racial justice and equalities, Mayor Fiaz was awarded an OBE in 2019 for services to Black and minority ethnic communities in the UK. So please join me in welcoming her to this event.
Thank you very much. Friends, for those that have probed the research and have been reflecting on the opening commentary, and will delve deeper during the course of this morning, no doubt for all of us, it's arresting and sobering. And for those of us that are experiencing the impact of the fragility of modern life, it's pretty devastating. Especially so that in this time of great insecurity that reflects those domains of inquiry that residents have been working on through this really important citizen science collaboration with the Institute And I have to thank the team, Henrietta, for your amazing leadership and visionary work in this area. It's really, really hard. I mean, that's such a crude, simple, basic fact, but it is really hard. And let me explain why it's really hard. Right now, I'm entering into some profoundly important discussions with officers and local elected members and with our citizens in Newham, because we presently face what some people have described an existential crisis that is not unique to Newham but faces the entirety of local government in this country, particularly acute in London. And that's because of some fundamental flaws in the housing market in this country, which everyone has been aware of for at least 10 years, if not longer. All these things can be evidenced. You can do all this amazing forecasting. And the question is, who really listens? And if you think about the radical agenda, predicated on transforming people's lives and places that I'm pursuing, it's driven by one simple intent: to ensure that people, regardless of their personal circumstances, their gender, their ethnicity, are not held back, but they live and feel secure in their lives. They feel empowered and enabled. But I can't guarantee that. And one of the reasons I can't guarantee that is because I don't run markets, and there's still an entrenched orthodoxy around how markets need to be managed. And I don't run national government, and we've had 14 years of a disastrous national government that, simply put, doesn't care. It's driven by ideological blindness that doesn't realise the real human impact. And what struck me when I was reflecting on the headlines across those domains of insecure livelihoods as experienced across the areas of evidence gathering, and particularly those 6 in Newham, such contrasts, and also universalism around housing. So presently we're facing a forecast budget gap of £175 million over the next 3 years. We're a 1.5 billion organisation. We don't have ready access to that wad of money. A lot of it is just passported to schools and the like. We have something in the region of about £370 million, crudely put, to play with, but to play with isn't flexible play with. We've got to meet statutory requirements as it relates to children, young people and adults in our social care system. We've got a budget for public health, and we're grappling with dealing with the social determinants of health inequality and ill health, which is poverty. And we have 68% of our resident population living in the private rented sector, in the context of a broken housing market that is leading to more and more people presenting to the council as being homeless because they've been given their eviction notice. This week alone, I've been dealing with one acute case of a small one-child family household who have subletted a room illegally in the private rented sector here in Newham. The child is on a oxygen required ventilator process that needs to be changed every 48 hours. The child, I think, has just turned 1 year. They've been served an eviction notice. They've had bailiffs come round. They've been physically threatened. and we are trying to find emergency accommodation. We've managed to stave off them being on the streets for 3 days, and we're sorting out emergency accommodation tonight. But that's just a human example of what we're grappling with in the context of the legal requirement to ensure people aren't destitute, but the crippling costs of emergency temporary accommodation. Literally, the sector or the market or that subsector of the market acts like a cartel. We are managing really well, moving people out pretty quickly from costly nighttime emergency accommodation, but we've got a significant supply retraction of homes that we can use for temporary accommodation. Yes, we are purposeful in building and investing presently some £1 billion through borrowing, building our homes, but building homes takes time, and we're having to use some of that to accommodate those households who need a roof over their heads and are classified as being TA is the acronym. And the reason I'm providing these examples, these human stories, is to really surface and bring into sharp focus, yes, the human impact, but the constraints that local authorities like Newham face because of policy positions and entrenched market inefficiency that is leading to the insecurity that people face and feel in their lives. I think it's quite interesting, the contrast between the optimism in the north of the borough, in Stratford Limpet Park, and the surrounding areas, Chobham. And I suspect, actually, from my own, for want of a better word, citizen science, field work, mere roving around, I know that that's still fragile. So I have quite in-depth conversations with the Chobham Manor Residents Forum, and they're acutely alert to the two-tier hierarchy that exists between those people that have at least some semblance of economic security and have bought their homes and are leaseholders and are just about managing to deal with the triple whammy of the fixed estate charge, increases in council tax and the like, with regards to mortgage payments, as you know, which have spiraled because of our inflation crisis. But they're acutely alert to those residents that are the social housing tenants who really are feeling stuck. They're feeling stuck because they can't even leave Chobham Manor, which they want to in order to maintain some financial survival. But they're stuck in this spiralling circle of genuinely affordable social housing that's supposed to help, but they're similarly exposed to rising rents annually by the housing providers. I think it's really interesting that the research has also sharpened focus on the gender and racial disparities, and it was very arresting to read the levels of financial insecurity and not feeling prosperous has become entrenched. And that's a direct consequence of the 14 years of austerity, but actually the impacts of COVID-19 still and the cost of living crisis. The £175 million budget forecast is primarily driven by TA costs, £100 million forecast to be spent over the next 3 years by the council. And it's not necessarily because the numbers are growing, because we're getting better and better at supporting families in regards to our preventative work, but the excruciating costs because of what I've mentioned earlier, a broken market, it's something that we cannot deal with singularly or alone. So that's why we're asking, as part of a mobilisation of local government, for the new Labour government to step in and help. We've been very clear and open and transparent about our request for exceptional financial support. But we're having to make some really tough decisions pretty soon. And one area which I would actually really welcome your involvement and engagement, and I'm happy to come back to speak to the team and also convene another sort of budget engagement conversation. We're having to seriously think about a reduction in our council tax support scheme. We had set it at 90% relief back in 2019 as part of our inclusive growth, community wealth built-in, anti-poverty, tackling inequality drive. We're having to seriously consider, and we will be consulting on reducing it by 20% to 70% relief. Part of that has been driven by an officer mindset, let's benchmark with neighbouring boroughs. But if the average household income in Newham no way reflects those of neighbouring boroughs outside of the growth boroughs, it's quite difficult to make an adequate comparison. We're also needing to think about actually how we repurpose our interventions as it relates to offering routes into financial security, and we know that that's more secure jobs, but jobs that pay the London living wage, jobs that command those higher than average salaries, because we've got a talent base here that so many local authorities would be envious of, but they still are struggling to access those high income, high skill jobs that we're trying to incubate. And I think that's why the place partnership with collaborators both in the East Bank, the London Legacy Development Corporation, UCL and others in the Royal Docks are so vital. And so I was really heartened to hear the East Bank partners have become members, because the challenge that I will always give to members of the wider Newham Place family is, what can you really materially do for our residents? I'm not really interested anymore in 5 apprenticeships as part of a secured Section 106 agreement or work experience for about 10 kids. It's just not good enough. We need to really mobilise our collective ingenious talent resources, and that includes money, so that we can offer a semblance of hope in a landscape where too many people still, at this juncture in the 21st century in this country, are feeling so insecure. I am really interested in the interface between the health prosperity alongside the financial security that is felt in different parts. What's been working there that hasn't worked well elsewhere in Newham? And I suspect that's heavily racialised. We shouldn't be embarrassed and afraid to talk about race or gender and class, because these things are material and they have impact. And we shouldn't be frightened in having conversations, honest and frank, with all of our people, including those that are young. I will end with a note of optimism, and that will pick up on the young point. I was at the Stratford Youth Zone event on Tuesday. It's Thursday today, isn't it? Yeah. Because we were announcing our 2 Newham representatives for the UK Youth Parliament, and it's a sign of how far we've moved and shifted in terms of us intentionally wanting Newham to become the best place in the world for a child and young person to grow up. I spoke to parents and I spoke to the young people. Parents are obviously so proud. These are parents exactly feeling and living what is described in the research and what's been brought to the surface. But they have kids that are so ambitious. One's going to be going to Eton, and he grew up in East Ham. He's got so much ambition for himself and his family, but more importantly, his community. And when he was awarded or announced as being one of the 2 winners of our Newham representatives at the UK Parliament, he said something profoundly important and with grace. I'm doing this because I want to give back. I want to give back to my community because Newham's the best place. It's given me so much. And I know that there are many kids like me who have come from challenging backgrounds. Himself from a family of 7, 5 kids, a couple with profound needs. But he's managed to get himself a place at Eton. And just imagine the world of possibilities that will open up for him, but also how he will help elevate his family's income because he cares. So let's not lose sight of the talent that we have locally. Let's enable them, but let's not forget also those of older ages who feel stuck, who feel vulnerable, who feel fragile and don't know where to go for help. We all have a collective responsibility to provide hope and to minimise or mitigate the fear. And it's a demonstration of our allyship, but more than that, it's a demonstration of actually our love for each other and the amazing community that is here in Newham. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that speech, which I think is not only heartfelt, but also focuses us all on why we're here today and why what we're doing really matters, and why the work of the London Prosperity Board really, really matters. So thank you, Rokhsana, very much indeed. So we're going to move on now to a panel which is going to explain to you all what changes when citizen scientists define prosperity. Which I think is a good thing to start with. And citizen science is very good. And it's going to be a panel with Dr. Saffron Woodcraft, who's the executive lead for the Prosperity Collab in the IGP and for the whole of the UK, in fact. Saffron does wonderful work. She's Professorial Research Fellow and Director of Social Policy at the IGP. And Twinkle Jay, who is one of our most well-known and most beloved citizen social scientists from Beckton in Newham, and graduated from the UCL Citizen Science Academy. And previously she was a school governor and a volunteer in a children's centre. So please welcome Saffron and Twinkle.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to try and manage the clicker and the microphone and my notes, so it might be tricky. So you will hear us talk a lot about citizen-led prosperity metrics and citizen science. Some of you will be familiar with what we mean by that, but we wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about what we mean and how the qualitative research that underpins the Prosperity Index that we're launching today has been developed over a number of years. Because what we are focusing on today is the index and the dashboard that are being launched, but there's a huge wealth of really rich, citizen-led, community-based, participatory research that has gone on over several years to kind of underpin this work. So I want to just talk a little bit about that process. So right back in 2015, when we were launching the Prosperity Board, we ran over a 3-year period with 2 cohorts of citizen scientists. And when we say citizen scientists, we mean people who live in the research sites where we're working, who, as Henrietta said, are trained by the Citizen Science Academy and employed to work alongside the research team. So they work as social researchers in their own neighbourhoods. So over a 3-year period, we worked with 2 cohorts of researchers, asking 3 quite simple questions with the intention that we could investigate lived experiences of prosperity in East London. So what we asked was, what does prosperity mean to you? So as Henrietta said, the conventional way of thinking and defining prosperity in policy terms, in political terms, focuses on economic growth, focuses on job growth and income. But what we wanted to do was really understand, what does it mean if you live in East London? What supports and what prevents people from living good lives. So we could develop a more rounded kind of understanding. But what you can see are some of the team in action, essentially. So we, with that group of 20 citizen scientists, we looked at research across 5 different neighbourhoods, and that involved a huge variety of in-depth interviews, kind of walking ethnographies, focus groups with people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and community organisations as well. So collectively, the team compiled over 250 different accounts of what it means to live a prosperous life in East London. And what that enabled us to do was to identify the determinants of prosperity based on lived experience. So we could really understand how different factors, how different services interact in people's everyday lives to develop then a kind of a multi-dimensional framework that represents those determinants. And what you can see here is the model that underpins the Citizen Prosperity Index. So we're looking at 5 different domains, 14 different subdomains of prosperity. And what they do is reflect both psychological and emotional factors, so things to do with well-being, things to do with livelihood security, but it also reflects how services are delivered in the neighbourhood, and it also reflects things like structural economic factors. So this is all things that are playing out in people's everyday lives in a neighbourhood sense, but often the decisions about how these services are delivered, or spatial planning is configured, are made at different scales that people have very little control over. So this is the model that underpins the index that we're looking at today. So as Henrietta said, the index that we're launching today is part of the Prosperity in East London longitudinal study. So this is focused on neighbourhoods that are experiencing urban regeneration. So there's 15 hyperlocal areas in the study. They are a combination of planned new neighbourhoods, so the planned new neighbourhoods in the Olympic Park that are part of the Legacy Community Scheme, established neighbourhoods like those that surround the Royal Docks area that will be experiencing rapid regeneration, and estate regeneration areas in Poplar too. We particularly wanted to have a combination of both planned, new and established neighbourhoods because urban regeneration is such a complex area of policy. We tend to think about it as being focused on spatial delivery, but increasingly there are so many socio-economic policy objectives that are built into regeneration delivery, and it's a complex partnership structure as well. So we have public and private and extended kind of supply chains. So together, all of these different stakeholders, if we have a different kind of evidence base, can have an idea of what place-based prosperity means in context. So these are the 15 areas, the 15 hyperlocal areas that are involved in the study, clustered around 4 kind of main regeneration areas across 5 different boroughs. So that is a quick introduction to several years' worth of qualitative work that I hope just gives you a little bit of a flavour of how we've developed this concept, this multi-dimensional concept of prosperity. Now I'm going to hand over to our most important speaker today, Twinkle. He's just going to talk to us a bit about the importance of citizens having a voice.
Thank you, Saffron. So my name is Twinkle. I started trained by citizen social scientists by IGP UCL, and I went through the training during the project of Prosperity in East London longitudinal study. So we were the first batch for the training to be a citizen social scientist, going out in the community and doing research. So we went through the training process, learning different methodologies, and then how to collect the data, analyze the data, and do presentations with those data. And then we went out into the community, and we were given 5 to 6 areas in East London to do the research. So when we went out to the community, we went out with a basic question of what good life means to the people living in East London. And that's when we kind of realized how the situation is different in East London and how the people there are struggling and the issues that they face in those areas. So for example, when we were talking to people, we kind of realized how regeneration, which we know kind of was introduced during the Olympics, was affecting those areas. And one area that in particular that we were talking to people, they came up with how the regeneration was promised to them like 10 years ago, and how it started with a random letter of that regeneration is going to happen, and you just have to leave the area. So some people got scared, they left the area. But some people wanted to stay back and see what will happen in those areas. But that was 10 years ago when we went there and talked to them. So the areas that we saw was deserted. It was not looked after. The area the shops were closed down. They were just randomly 1 or 2 shops was open, which is not affordable for the people living there. Then the houses were in a very bad condition, but people didn't want to do major works in those houses because they didn't know when the houses are going to come down. Then the community centers, the libraries were closed in those areas, which is a vital, important part of a community. And because of which the families, the young people living in those areas didn't have any support, kind of have the access to support the older generations. The young people who would go for some activities after school or whatever, they were then pulled into gangs, and then crime increased in those areas, which lead to a lot of safety issues that people didn't feel safe in those areas. And the mental health in the people living in that local were just declining. And these are like basic services like bus services were stopped. Some services were not good. And this is just a part of like what they have been living through over 10 years. So these are just one example of how we started off, and we kind of tapped into many issues that they were going through. So when people ask me like, community people should be involved in research, I said yes, because community people are much more familiar with the issues. They don't talk in academic language. They talk in much more like a conversation. We relate to those issues, we can listen to them, and they don't feel the disconnect when they talk to us. They just talk like a normal conversation, and they just open up. So that's why I feel, yes, the community members should be a part of the research. And for me, the citizen scientist has given me the confidence to be the voice of those, like project the community voices, kind of telling the people, like, you know, whenever I go for different roles I play, like I give presentations or being a focus group, my role would be to have channel those voices from the community to make them understand why these issues are important and why we need to address it right now. And those are the issues that I feel I'm connected to, and then it helps the community make a better place to live in, and that kind of gives me that confidence to approach to the decision makers and tell them that the decision that you make is affecting the people who have to live with those decisions every day. So it's always best to listen to the community than assuming what they want. Thank you so much.
From Dr. Nikos Sivanakis, who's the head of the data team at the IGP. And he's going to tell us about what does the Citizen Prosperity Index tell us about life in East London. So Nikos, please.
So not here just to change the slides. So I need to see a screen at least, some kind. Mayor has already stolen some of my lines, but I'm gonna show some nice figures with the data. main aspect of what I'm going to talk about is like there are some reports that we're launching today in the table, so you can look at what the numbers are telling us about prosperity in East London. So we're going to look into who is thriving and who is struggling in East London, what are the general patterns in terms of demographics and spatial, and also how are prosperity gains from generation shared across sites. The overall trends are that we have some place-specific patterns of opportunity. They are very, we have very established patterns in our data about inequality across gender, ethnicity, and age. Women report lower prosperity than men. People from non-white backgrounds less prosperous than people from white backgrounds, and older people tend to report lower scores as well. There are deep-rooted challenges of livelihood insecurity across all areas and demographic, and one of the main findings is that, we expected this finding, but one of the main things that we found is that it's not directly linked to income. Okay, so people from all income and backgrounds report livelihood security issues. There is a complex relationship between demographics, place, and prosperity. There are major variations across all our sites, and overall prosperity gains more likely to be accrued to residents or of planned new neighborhoods. So, in terms of gender, overall women report about 10% lower prosperity in terms of secure income and work. There are sites where this is above 20%, the difference is above 20%. Ethnic background also plays an important role, and non-white residents usually report lower prosperity. What we found is that, especially for black residents, they report 20% less in secure income and work, and freedom from financial stress is around 30% less in performance. There is high variability in prosperity indicators among neighborhoods, livelihood insecurity, especially issues around affordable housing, already mentioned, and financial stress, are widespread across all locations. Most neighborhoods report low scores for sense of community. However, despite the low scores in sense of community, there is a high score in social relationships, which means that people have support networks around. There is also positive performance in healthy, safe, and clean neighborhoods across most of the sites. Comparing new and established neighborhoods, we find that new neighborhoods report about 8% higher levels of work and income security, 33% higher rates of lifelong learning, and about 35% higher scores in good start in life. Established neighborhoods report about 60% higher levels of financial stress, they are less able to save, and they are more likely to face debt burden. And what I want to show you is one of the main things that you can look into our data, and I don't want you to read too much into what exactly the graphs say, but just to show the importance of hyperlocal data. On the left side, we have the London average, or the East London average, the study average. On the right-hand side, we have every specific location mapped across all our domains and subdomains, which shows that how much information we lose when we aggregate data to borough level, country level, or whatever level data we are using in order to inform policies. And with that, I'm very excited to announce that we are launching the public version of our dashboard. Links are in the London Prosperity Board website. Resources will be shared. You can find more information about the study, about the index, the scores, how every location is performing in every domain and subdomain, and the methodology around the study, and much more. I'm going to hand over to Saffron to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you will see in the report that we're sharing that we've just identified some headline points which we think the research identify for policy and practice. It's early days. This is the beginning of the 10-year study. But I think if we look at this data alongside the research that we've been doing over the previous decade and the body of literature that looks at regeneration in East London, we can see that the prosperity gains from urban regeneration investments are not spilling over to disadvantaged communities. And this is important because legacy regeneration, most of the strategic regeneration programs underway in London specifically aim to deliver benefits and improved opportunities to the disadvantaged neighbourhoods where those schemes are taking place. So this is an important point, and it speaks to what Henrietta was saying and also Mayor Fiaz was saying about the models, the underlying assumptions and the models that we're currently working with. Related to that is the idea that we can see this very different population profile in planned new neighbourhoods. So we're importing prosperity in a sense. Obviously, we need to look at how this continues to develop through the different waves of the study. But I think for me, the key point is that the current models we have, the current assumptions that underpin regeneration, mean that we can't address the effects of structural inequalities and injustices without targeted interventions. So in an ideal world, we will rethink the models, but in the meantime, we need data like this to help us identify and understand the landscape of inequalities so we can develop targeted interventions. And I think that is relevant to the partnership nature of regeneration projects, because we're talking about public, we're talking about private, we're talking about social value strategies and other community wealth building strategies, which are social policy objectives, but for which local authorities are often not always directly delivering. So just a few points to leave you with, and I will hand back to Henrietta.
Thank you very much indeed. And I hope you will all link to the new dashboard, because this data is now available for you to look at, and that's a very important part of what we're doing today. So make it available to all of you. So now we're going to move on, I think, and have the first panel discussion. And so I'm going to introduce Lizzie Hawkins and Dan. So Bridge, Lizzie and Dan would like to come and sit up next to me. And I think we have a, I don't know, I think we have to pass this microphone between us. So it's a bit like, sort of follow on, but anyway. So Lizzie and Dan are going to have an opportunity to reflect from their perspective on why this work is important to them, to their teams, and to London. So let me just say very briefly that Lizzie Hawkins is the Deputy Director for Communities, Governance and Institutions in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And her work focuses on strengthening communities at the local level, giving them the tools and support to shape their local areas. And Dan Bridge is Programme Director at the Royal Docks, leading the team responsible for delivering the regeneration of the area, which is also a joint initiative between the Mayor of London and the Mayor of Newham. And the Royal Docks is the Mayor of London's largest land-led regeneration project and a designated enterprise zone. So Lizzie and Dan, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Let me pass this to you, because I'm going to ask you the first question, Lizzie, okay? So, Lizzie, let's start with, from your point of view, what's the importance of this work for government plans for devolution and transferring power to communities? How do you see it?
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting me to be here today. So I think I had a prepared answer to this, and then I heard what the Mayor's very powerful and moving statement, and it made me rethink a bit what I wanted to say at this point. So bear with me if this is, a little clunky. So I think everyone in this room and everyone in government recognises the challenges that we're facing at the moment. And I'm here from a central government department, specifically the one that looks at housing, communities and local government. And I can look at the big levers that the government's already starting to pull, with commitments on building new houses, with new stronger rights for renters, with the announcements last week about making work pay and reducing job insecurity, and with the work that's started to be led by Georgia Gould in the Cabinet Office about public service reform, to try and find a way through the immense challenges that I know everyone, local councils, local authorities in particular, are facing, with statutory commitments around adult social care, special educational needs, children's social care, that is taking up so much of local government budgets, which could be going on a much broader, and used to be going on a much broader range of provision. So I think there are those big central levers that central government is starting to pull, and there's a whole range of other things that I won't go into. But I think fundamentally for this kind of work, one of the more important things that central government can do is get out of the way. And that's why there has been several announcements, and there's the legislation coming about devolving power, getting power out of Westminster and down to a more sensible level, where this kind of index, this kind of information, this kind of really local rich data can inform decisions being made at those more local levels. Because I think what I see in my role, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but what I see is there is an immense amount of creativity and innovation happening on the ground. I think the existence of the London Prosperity Board is testament to that. People want to get together, they want to form partnerships, they want to join up and bring all the different assets and resources, whether it's the brilliant citizen scientists or whether it's the NHS or local government. People want to come together and make the most of what exists in a place, and that's why through the English Devolution Bill, through against devolving power, we want to unleash that. I think we've committed to longer term funding settlements. We've committed to reducing the proliferation of competitive funding pots that make it a lot more difficult to stitch together a meaningful solution on the ground. So from that central perspective, that's what we're trying to do. And I think that element of getting out of the way and enabling that decision making and delivery to happen at a more local level is a really important part of addressing this. As far as the CPI itself, when Saffron told me about it, I got very excited. I was like, "Can you tell me more about this? Because this sounds brilliant." And I think there's three things that I think are particularly sort of useful and interesting about it. The first thing, that hyperlocal view. I think we know that there are, massive variations even at that very hyperlocal level, all the way across the country. The majority of local authorities have an area that is in, I think the bottom 10% of the index of multiple deprivation. We know that is the case across the country, and that is a genuine issue, because it means that not everyone is sharing in the growth that we want to unleash. And so this kind of work to really help show those variations and make that case and enable that argument to be made is incredibly important. And I think the other aspect of it is that inclusion. The fact that we've been able to draw on and unleash the energy and understand the perspectives of everyone who's living in a place, I think that is incredibly important. And I know that our ministers are really interested in how we can unleash and empower people within those neighbourhoods, particularly in those neighbourhoods that have those variations. And I've been privileged to visit a lot of the big local neighbourhoods. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's I'm seeing lots of nods. Essentially, over 10 years ago, 150 neighbourhoods around the country were given £1 million and told make your neighbourhoods better. And I have gone round to all sorts of places. This was led by the big local and National Lottery funding, by the way. I'm not going to say that this was a government programme. That's not fair. But there are so many examples of places coming together to advocate and build their confidence, and through engagement and asking, what do we want to change, what matters to you? And so this citizen science as a way of engaging people and building the belief that things can change is incredibly important. And it's we are thinking, in government, how we can, what we can do, again, with these big clunky levers that we have at the centre of government to unleash and encourage more of that, so that this growth that we're seeking really is an inclusive and meaningful thing. That was a really long answer to your question, but hopefully it was a bit of a scene setter as well.
Thanks very much, Lizzie. That was a very good answer and very, very helpful. We'll come back to specifics on one or two things in a minute. But just going to Dan for a second. So, Dan, you're leading this enormous regeneration project. So what's the value of what we're doing for you with the Citizen Prosperity Index?
Good question. So I think what I thought I'd do is maybe just I can see lots of partners around the room that know probably some of this stuff, but I thought for some of you it might just be useful to set the context of what is happening in the Royal Docs and then explain how working with you, it's sort of informed the journey that we've been on over probably 6-7 years. So the Royal Docks is in the south of Newham. It's the largest opportunity area in the London Plan. It has the potential to deliver about 35,000 new homes and 55,000 jobs over the next 20 years. It's a combination of some very big post-industrial dockland sites like Silvertown that have been derelict for 40 years, and I can see Sam from Lendlease over there. But it's surrounded by a number of quite deprived, long-standing local communities that very much in social housing, which is part of this study area. And the area's seen huge levels of investment actually over a 40-year period in infrastructure. So you've had DLR, some really big anchor institutions have moved in, like Excel and City Airport and University of East London. But it's been, as a sort of a regeneration project, it's been passed from sort of government regeneration agency to other government regeneration agencies. And it wasn't until about 2012 that the land assets in the docks that are owned by the GLA, the Mayor of London, came to the GLA from the bonfire of the Quangos. And so I guess this current phase of regeneration probably started around about then. And actually, when I first started working on the Royal Docks, we had an incredibly small team. I'm talking about probably 3 or 4 people, very much looking at the project from a property development place. So we were effectively managing development partners on big, large development sites. And clearly we identified that wasn't good enough. And what we needed to do, because the other really interesting thing about the Royal Docks is it's an enterprise zone, which means that really helpfully we get to retain all of the business rate income that is on our new developments. So we have an income stream that's protected for use in the docks until 2038. But at the time, what we were required to do was to effectively create a big Treasury business case to unlock that funding with a very small team. And so we employed Arup at the time to help us do that. And given the fact that we didn't have a team or we didn't have any funding, we had to almost do this business case in pretty much a vacuum without talking to our local communities about what they wanted, to work out how to make a case for what level of investment was required in the docks. And so we did that in about 2018, successfully submitted a business case and unlocked in the region of about £300 million worth of finance that could be used to invest in the docks. And around about the same time, Rokhsana was elected as Mayor of Newham, and those of you know the politics of Newham, very different politician to what had come previously. And I was quite concerned at the time that she would say, "I hate your plan, rip it up and do it again," after a couple of years' work. But fortunately she didn't. She saw real value in the work that we'd done and the importance of actually motoring and getting stuff done. But she said to us, look, I don't necessarily disagree with the sort of projects and things that are set out in that plan, but actually we need to completely change the approach here. And actually all I'm really interested in is what this is doing for local communities and people in these communities. And she sort of, effectively said, gave us a pretty hard time for about 6 months, but effectively said to her, "I'm not happy to support you, but we need to completely shift approach here." So that timed really nicely, I think, with the work that you were doing. We led a year-long conversation with our communities called Big Conversation. See Sarah there that leads our communities work. And this dovetailed really nicely with that. And actually what we found is that sort of the things that we'd identified that need to be addressed weren't that dissimilar to what the communities were saying. It's not, some of this stuff, you know, is reasonably obvious. But actually the way that we were thinking about it was incredibly different. And so actually what it affected, not necessarily some of the stuff that we were delivering in terms of visual projects, but it made us really think about the why and the how. And so I think the opportunity to work with you and with the citizen scientists has been incredibly helpful, and we're doing it in partnership with Lend-Lease. So I think you know, the other really important thing here is that we're representatives of Newham and the GLA, but doing it in partnership with Lend-Lease has been incredibly important. And I think it's done a few things. So I think, you know, it's created an element of trust, I think, between the community and the work that we're doing, because we're being very open and transparent about what it is that we're doing, and having the citizen scientists like Twinkle out there talking to the communities and us being very open and honest about how we're performing has been incredibly useful. I think it's the way the data is presented in the dashboards is really fascinating, because I think it's affected the way that we think about our work strategically. So it's, you know, we've moved from an outputs type approach to thinking about outcomes and how we achieve outcomes, and that's been incredibly important in our latest delivery plan. But it's also allowed us to really act quite tactically, because I think the other thing that it does, working at this very super output level, is I think in the past we've tended to think about issues across our community. It's quite a big patch, not from government terms, but it's quite a big patch. But actually it's really fascinating about how actually some of our communities are facing very difficult and interesting challenges. And so in our latest delivery plan that was approved earlier this year, we've very much moved towards a neighbourhoods approach, and thinking about how we have specific interventions in our 6 different neighbourhoods. And then maybe just to give you a couple of examples about how it's sort of changed some of the things that we're doing. So when we first started the plan, you know, thinking about this from a place point of view, and people think about, you know, in this in regen terms, don't they? They think about things like King's Cross and nice restaurants and bars and shops and things, and that's what everybody wanted in the Royal Docks, we thought. I think some of the work that's really interesting from the citizen scientists was what they were saying about shops in the Olympic Park, and about how actually for lots of communities, lots of the shops that were provided that I think some people, certain types of people might think is great and nice, they just felt weren't for them. And I think one of the things I can really remember them saying was, shops that don't have very much on the shelves, I don't even bother going in because I know they're going to be too expensive and I can't afford it. So anyway, so we've just very recently very recently established a food board in the Royal Docks to address some of those concerns about food and beverage, but actually with a much broader scope of activity, looking at food security as well as some of those other things, and actually the sort of the quality of the response that we've got, and I think the potential of that work to not only really address some of those food security issues, but look at how we can, the broader relationships between providing good quality food and beverage across the patch could be really interesting. And then the final bit before I hand back to you is that I think something that's become, again, another observation of mine is when you're in the regeneration game, and particularly when there's a big property playing it, and it's actually very tough at the moment. People, I think the market's very tough. Viability is incredibly challenged. Things have happened in the market that have made it very difficult actually just to deliver schemes, which is why you'll have seen starts drop off. But one of the things that I've observed over the last few years is how very often we think about the completion of a development as the end of the road. And I think as a team, we've shifted our thoughts very much on that to think actually that's really only the start. And we're now doing a huge amount of work based on some of the findings of this and with Lend-Lease to look at our what we're calling social stewardship, and thinking about what we're doing now that enable these communities to be successful over time. So they're just a few examples of the things that we're looking at the moment, but there's a lot more as well that I'm sure we'll pick up.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And actually, I mean, I think one of the things we need to do as a sort of community of activists and thinkers here is to think about what we might mean by all these words like social stewardship and social value and various other things that are in this space, because we have social value legislation that we're needing to attend to here. And I think that's one of the interesting things. But we have such important people in the audience. I just want to open up. So is there anyone who's got specific questions for Lizzie and Dan, rather than me thinking of questions? Who would like to jump in? We've got roving mics, so is there someone there?
Thank you. I've been struck on listening to the conversation. There's a difference between insight and agency. When Rokhsana was speaking at the beginning, I think it boils down that we have no agency. When you talk about hyper-local views, I get it that you can see inside the box, but I don't get it that you're able to get people inside the box to be able to do something about it. And frankly, I'm a little surprised when I hear about the neighbourhood renewal. You know, well done for getting to see the light, but why is it that government has not seen the light for a very long time? We have known this stuff. We have known that it's agendas of market and agendas of property and agendas of economic prosperity that gouge out the hearts of communities. We've known this from the miners' strikes. We've known this for 40 years. And yet we're circling around again. So my question is insight necessary or is agency necessary?
Right, so perhaps I could go back to Lizzie first on that. So Lizzie, sitting in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, how is this insight going to make a difference to things that happen on the ground, do you think, from your perspective? Or how could it, should we put it that way?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good and very live question about, and I think it comes back to what I was saying before about we're talking about getting power out of Westminster, but it doesn't, that sort of feels irrelevant if it's just gone to, however lovely Andy Burnham is or Sadiq Khan, if it's just gone to another sort of unaccountable, distant person, and you're not feeling like you're able to change things. So, I mean, from a central perspective, we're looking at things like strengthening a community right to buy. So strengthening the kind of community rights that will enable more of that agency that you're talking about. And I think there's an element, though, of how can you strengthen people's rights, but actually if people are not in a position to use those rights because they don't know about them or because, as we've seen in a lot of the big local areas, there's so often a lack of confidence, a lack of belief that anything's going to happen and anything's going to change, and actually investing in that confidence and agency and providing those connections and relationships with strategic partners like the local government and other health services, that takes a long time to build up. And so that's, the things that we're looking at in terms of the Community Wealth Fund using dormant assets. Ignore me talking about dormant assets. But the Community Wealth Fund to sort of, how can we do that really hyper-local investment in capacity and to give people that agency. So I think it's a matter of how do we strengthen people's rights, but also how do we build people's capacity to then use them.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. Agency is incredibly important, isn't it? But I guess the challenge that we've got is the power influence that we have. You're right, is absolutely limited, and so in very many ways we're trying to do the best that we can with what we've got. And I sort of felt that when Rokhsana was speaking this morning, is that just the challenge that the government's facing, isn't it, at the moment, where it's been trying to be very careful not to paint such a negative picture because it's trying to attract growth, and that's very typical of Newham in many ways, because Rokhsana's got this very difficult challenge of trying to deliver for her communities and understanding actually that lots of the levers that in many cases the only levers that she's got is to try and get some of that investment from private developers, because frankly, from affordable homes delivery in the Royal Docks, lots of that is effectively delivered and subsidised through the delivery of the private housing. So I think there's a real challenge there, and I think on the agency point, so we've done some really interesting things with Newham on that. So through people power places, participatory democracy, but it's at a very small scale really. So it's relatively small pots of money that's used to engage with the community. But when there's so many other bigger challenges out there, changes to benefits, changes to people's incomes, it's very, very difficult. And I think it feels, in my opinion, it feels a lot tougher than it has done for a very long time.
But let me just say that one of the things I think is different here is the way that the partnerships are building up at the local area. I think what we've done in Royal Docks with the partnership with the community is making a difference. And it's bringing together businesses, local organisations, civil society organisations and others to do something that's quite distinct. So before we might have known something about a particular borough like Newham. Now we have something which is about hyperlocal data. And hyperlocal data allows you to do different things in terms of delivering social value at different places across the regenerative space, right? And this wasn't really possible before, because before we were doing, okay, if you've got to do social value for regeneration, let's have a few apprenticeship schemes, or let's do something, right, which the developers were pushing for. Now I think we have a way of bringing new kind of innovation into that space, and it's worth thinking about what that is for all of us. So thank you very much, Lizzie and Dan. Very, very good. Lovely to have your insight. Lovely to have you with us. Can you give them a big round of applause, please? And now we're going briefly back to Saffron, who is going to pick up on the point I've just made and discuss partnerships for impact, a new model for London. Saffron.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to talk for very long. But I think what I do want to say relates directly to the question that this gentleman just raised. So it's like, well, what difference is this work going to make? So some of the IGP team were at a workshop just 2 days ago with a group of academics who are specialists in this area, and this question arose a couple of times. It's like, we know this. We know about the dynamics of regeneration in London, so what difference is it going to make having this hyperlocal data? And I feel that actually the difference is in the sustained partnership working, and how having a cross-sector partnership that can work together over many years, and the London Prosperity Board, as Henrietta said, was set up in 2016, so next year will be our 10th anniversary of working together, and that's citizen scientists, it's civil society, it's local London central government, it's the private sector, going on a journey of rethinking prosperity together. So this is not just about insight and evidence, because the world is full of amazing research, but that research and knowledge is no good if it's not useful and it's not actually used. So one of the main goals of the Prosperity Board is to change the way that decision makers think and act for shared prosperity. So we've got a group of stakeholders who all have a vested interest in the future of East London and can act in lots of different ways. Some of that is through policy and planning, some of it is through investment, some of it is through direct community-based interventions. So we've talked a bit this morning about the redefinition process and how we've worked with communities, but I think for me some of the most powerful work around the London Prosperity Board is the work that we have done together to understand what evidence is useful and how it can be used by different stakeholders to make a difference to the way that they work internally. So it's not just about the insight, it's a way that insight then influences practice, and whether that practice is investment or planning or delivering services. So I think there's something really interesting here about the way that universities, or the role of universities, and the way that we can work with partnership with partners over a long period of time. In conventional terms, we talk about research impact as, knowledge exchange. We produce research and we share it with policymakers, and hopefully they will use it. And this is a very different way of thinking about the role of universities, because all of those different stakeholders in the London Prosperity Board are learning together. So yes, we are redefining prosperity with and for communities, but more importantly, we are also understanding, well, what is it that public-private sector regeneration partnerships need to understand about how to work with citizen scientists that will make a difference? How do we understand the relationships between central government, local government, London government when we're thinking about these different ways of working? So I think there is a lot of potential in this different kind of partnership model, and particularly in the role that universities have to kind of hold this space in the long term through multiple changes of government and multiple kind of reinterpretations of policy agendas. So I'm not going to say any more than that. I will hand back and over to the next panel.
Wonderful. So now we're moving on to the next panel with Darren Micken, Caroline Rouse, and Sarah Chater. So can I invite you, Darren and Caroline and Sarah, to come up, please? Have we got Sarah there? Yes. Wonderful. So let me first of all welcome you all three and thank you very much for being with us this morning. So Darren Micken is Director of Community Wealth Building at Newham Council. He's responsible for ensuring that the Council's regeneration and house building activities are aligned with its ambitions to develop an inclusive economy in the borough. Caroline Rouse is Director at Compost London CIC, an organisation based in Newham that she co-founded with 3 colleagues in 2018. And it's dedicated to helping other organisations grow by providing information, advice and support. And Caroline is a very long-serving member of the London Prosperity Board and has worked in community settings in East London for many years. And Sarah Chater is Director of Strategy and Policy for UCL Research, Innovation and Global Engagement and works very closely with the Vice Provost on the strategic direction of that portfolio. And she established and oversees UCL's public policy, which connects all of UCL's research to public policy. So welcome to the 3 of you. So let me start really by sort of, Caroline, asking you, how do you think being in the London Prosperity Board has really helped your thinking? And how do you think that that model of research policy and community engagement can actually help with the way we might think about policy making for communities in the borough?
So I think being on the Prosperity Board opened a lot of doors and eyes, really. It opened a lot of eyes to a community organisation that was sitting there and knew what it was talking about the local area. But also it opened a lot of eyes for the community. Compost is an enabling organisation, so we act as a bridge in many ways between organisations, and through this work, through people that we've recruited as citizen scientists who would never darken the door of a university without someone encouraging them and saying, they do really want you there. So I think it opens so many sort of new avenues to people to be able to sort of think about things. And what I really liked about it was that it was a level playing field. We were listened to, we were asked for our opinion, and I think that goes for the citizen scientists as well. The ones that were recruited, the ones that have sort of worked all their way through, they do feel that what they do is important, it's listened to and it has an effect. Especially when a property developer from the Royal Docks says, we want to do a different type of consultation now, we want some of your citizen scientists to work for us. So I think the London Prosperity Board is such a wonderful mix and gives you so many people in the room. You can have interesting and constructive conversations about things we all know about, but all have a different window on.
That's great. Thank you very much. And so, Darren, can I turn to you? I mean, as the Director of Community Wealth Building at Newham Council, this is an enormously important job. And do you think that there are sort of new partnership models that are emerging that you can work with in a different way? I mean, how do you see the space developing from your perspective?
Thank you. Thank you for that. I suppose one general reflection for me, kind of building on what Rokhsana was talking about before, but two things actually, is that this approach, this citizen-led approach, this data-led approach, and really kind of understanding the communities we're working for is critical to a lot of what Newham Council is doing and a lot of what my job is about. So a lot of people ask me, well, what do you mean by community wealth building? In effect, it's all of these things. It's looking at all of these levers, all of these abilities to influence and change society that the council has and applying them in places. So we are committed to the ethos of this work, and I'm pretty sure that you felt that coming across from Rokhsana, and it's reassuring and challenging actually to see some of the initial findings of this phase of the study, which do align with our own view that regeneration hasn't always benefited the people it should be benefiting. And that sort of is the point, I think, around the new form of partnerships. What we need to be doing, I think, as well as in that new form of partnership, is moving beyond the idea that you have a social value commitment or you deliver so much in terms of a Section 106 agreement, but to talk much more about what do you bring to the table as an organisation or set of organisations that can help this community, but in doing so, base that on data and understanding of the community. So a much more dynamic, much more live conversation. And for example, Dan's mentioned some of the work we're looking at. The council is involved with this work around stewardship in the south of the borough. And I think what we mean by that is that partnership approach. So the community, the council, the developer and the end users who come onto that site, starting from now, thinking about how that will work as a place, how they want to see it develop and kind of be deliberate about how that happens. And I think as well from a more kind of strategic council view, looking at using data like this to think about how we commission services, how we work with our partners in health and how we work with the third sector to make sure that the limited budgets we all have are making the most impact on communities.
Yes, I think that's enormously important. We'll come back to that in a second. So Sarah, if I could turn to you, then you have the job of making all of UCL's research relevant for public policy. How's that going?
I think that's a very unfair question. It's a work in progress.
It's work in progress.
So I would say it's going well, but one of the challenges that we have, I think, is recognising this as a centrally important agenda and not an add-on, which I think is, that I've heard echoes of that today. I think this sort of work, I think we put in the nice to have bucket. We sort of think we'll do it on top of things we're already doing. So there is a challenge as to how we embed it. And I think the things that Saffron was saying earlier actually about useful knowledge really resonate with me, because I think that's the fundamental challenge confronting universities now, is how do we think about effectively purposing our knowledge about making it useful so that it really is making a difference. A lot of this is a bit of a boring university point, but a lot of the sort of structural incentives in academia are not really around that. They're around writing obscure papers in journals. And that's brilliant as part of knowledge creation, but we don't pay enough attention to how to make it usable. And I think that's where, just as Saffron was saying, really, the role of universities as long-term institutions. Some of us have been around for 800 years. I'm not sure I can think of many institutions, perhaps other than the church, that have lasted that long. So having that long-term view, but also I think starting to really look at how we devote the time to develop this work. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by magic. So actually we need to properly plan in the time to build partnerships, to work with different forms of expertise and integrate that with our own. And that's, I think, how we make the knowledge useful. And then the final thing I suppose I'd say is we don't do enough starting with the problem. We often think we have a hypothesis or we have an idea of what the solution might be. We really don't do enough going out into the community and starting with what's your problem and how can we help. I think the Prosperity Board is a really notable exception to that. I wish it were more widespread.
Wonderful. Yes, well, we are always wanting to grow the London Prosperity Board. We're very, very fond of it, and chairing it is one of the great privileges of my life. So, Caroline, coming back to you, thinking about where you are in what could broadly be called, or is often called, a civil society organisation. How do you see these partnerships developing between local government, national government, civil society organisations, business? We talk a lot about that in the London Prosperity Board. Do you see the new conversations emerging there, or are they similarly like the old conversations?
I
think the conversations are the same. I think the actions that come out the other end of the conversations are the ones that are different, and that there are different people involved in the conversations. So I think acknowledging that people that live within a community and are active within their community bring a lot of knowledge to a conversation, and it's rich knowledge. It's not a hypothesis, it's real life. And so they are putting something new into that conversation, but I think it's important that there is an accountability once you've heard that. You have to do something with it, and you have to tell people what you've done with it. One of the big criticisms we have in the community is that we are often researched. Somebody comes in and does a piece of research and say, thank you very much, that got me another few letters, goodbye. And we never hear what became of it, and we never see any changes. But if you're using citizen social scientists, they go shopping in the same shop as you. They take their kids to the same daycare as you. Somebody's going to say to them, well, what did you do with that? So you need to have a much more accountability when you use those type of avenues for getting information. So I think the conversations are the same. It's just what you do with the result of that conversation and how important you value it.
Yes, I think that's very important, and that's something we work at. The way we work collaboratively on the London Prosperity Board works always to come up with what are the actions that follow from the conversations that we've had, and that I think is a particularly important way of making sure that things get done. But if I could turn to you, Darren, for a second. I mean, all this information is helpful, I understand, to you and your team. But how does the hyper local element of it really work for you? Is that too fine grained? How do you deal with this matter of, you've got a policy for the borough that you're having to implement, and now somebody's saying, well, sorry, but there are 6 different things going on here. How does that work?
Well, I actually think it's probably, in a way, it's the most exciting element of this sort of work, because it forces you to think differently about how you provide services. So if you take, for example, we're doing in Newham quite a lot of work and investment in income maximisation and helping people deal with the cost of living crisis, which is very much driven by the demand that is obviously within our communities. But if you take data that's informed on local areas, you could be targeting that activity. So, for example, if we knew there were particular income strains in North Woolwich, which there are, we could be designing outreach work, for example, or we could be identifying partners in those areas who we then work with to get closer to communities. And Newham has been doing elements of that, but I think we kind of need, I suppose, culturally, to start seeing ourselves as a bit more flexible, a bit less designed around service areas, a bit more driven by where the interventions can make the most difference. And data is really important to that. I think particularly as our resources are so constrained, the more we can focus it, the better. So I actually don't see that as a challenge. It's probably more of an opportunity for a local authority.
No, I'm very glad to hear that, because I did have one conversation with a SPAD who works for the Mayor of London, talking about this hyperlocal data. And he said, well, that's all very well, Professor Moore, but it's much too complicated and we can't possibly work with that, right? So so anyway, we haven't had too many conversations with that individual since as a result, but could be, coming back to you, Sarah, I mean, there are significant challenges here in dealing with this question of how do you move between types of knowledge. So what kind of sort of relationships is UCL as a university building with others so that those failures of communication don't happen? In other words, that we don't just come with all of this detail that we have and then people are looking for an answer to something that needs an action. How is your team working with that?
Thanks. I mean, that's a really great question. I don't think there's a simple answer to it, I'm afraid. So I suppose we start from some basic principles, and one is mutual dialogue, which I think is really important. I think the risk of doing what a colleague of mine, not at UCL actually, but she calls drive-by engagement, which is exactly what you were just articulating, Caroline, is really real and present, and it often comes from good intentions. So there is a fundamental point, I think, which is how do you establish mutual dialogue and not see things as one-off projects with a fixed end point, but see them as part of an ongoing engagement. So getting over that sort of conceptual shift, I think, and thinking about this as something that is long-term and sustainable. I think there's a need to establish their mutual trust and respect and recognise that academic expertise is just one part of the picture, and that is relevant to when you're talking with community organisations about their problems. It's also relevant when you're talking to decision makers who, you know, will draw on evidence, but actually, I mean, how many different components do you have to juggle if you're thinking about making decisions in Newham? So I think there's something about recognising that this is part of but not the whole picture. And so with that, really, I think you need also a degree of humility. And if I can just slightly malign my academic colleagues for a moment, I think there is a tendency, partly because of the way we train academics, to really think about how you embody your professorship by professing and not listening enough. I mean, I think, you know, Henrietta, Saffron, totally, you know, noble exceptions to this rule, but I think we just don't think enough about the value of listening and really, really hearing people. So those are the sorts of elements I think we need to form in these partnerships. And then the other thing I would say about the role that universities can play is as a sort of a generous partner and a convener of other people. We don't have to be in the centre of everything, but we can be really good sort of super connectors that can bring communities and business and civil society together. In fact, just in the way that the Prosperity Board has done.
Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful. But just going back for a second to the point that Darren was making about, you know, different things happening in different parts of the borough. So, and I think this is something that the Citizen Prosperity Index does show in its hyperlocality. In other words, that what is mission critical in one area isn't necessarily the top priority in another, right? And I think sort of being able to work with that kind of information is a challenge, and I think that's one of the things that we're working together on as the London Prosperity Board is working out what we can do about that, because if one can get that right, then there is a very real chance that actually one can make interventions which have cascading benefits across different areas for different groups of people, and actually reduce the amount of money you need to put in to make things happen. So Darren, can I just come back to you because and finish this very, very excellent panel with the point that the Mayor was making, which is that this is a moment of extreme budget constraint, yeah? And so, you know, you've got to do the community wealth building, do the inclusive economy, and you've got to get to net zero by 2030 or tomorrow, whatever it is. Yes, so the timeline is tight too. So can you just say a little bit about that for us to finish us off?
I mean, that's our to-do list, and I suppose it shows the breadth of ambition, responsibility that a council like Newham's got, and we're really driven by political leadership that wants to change and does want to achieve bigger things for the community. And that's why, you know, the arguments about, you know, racial inequalities, the injustices around gender are critical to all of that thinking. But for me, breaking that down into, right, how do we achieve that? It is literally that kind of bureaucratic exercise of making sure we're using our resources in the best way, which is why I think data is so important, because we're going to have to do much more with that.
Yes, yes. And can I just ask Caroline, is there anything you want to add at the end?
I think one of the things that I find really exciting about citizen social scientists and the LPB is that it does what it says. So we can look at citizen social scientists who generally don't come with an academic background. They come with a passion for their community, and we turn them into people who can sit in a panel with a lot of people here, and they can talk eloquently because they're talking about what they know. So you are giving people secure livelihoods and hopes and all those indices just by being here and running the Citizen Social Science Programme, which is magical.
Thank you very much, and it is rather magical, and it's all handled by Joseph Cook. I don't know where Joseph is now. He's hiding behind a pillar probably at this point. Yes, he is right at the back, okay. But we are enormously proud of the Citizen Science Academy. It is a great initiative that UCL has undertaken, and I hope that all of you in this room who are involved in any way in bettering the lives of people in London will reach out to Joseph and become part of that community of people who make the most of the citizen scientists. So we've come to the end of the morning, just in time before your chairs are removed, which I hope you will feel grateful for. I just want to say that it's a great privilege to lead the IGP in this work. But it's, of course, not me, really, who does it. It's Saffron and her team. Saffron is the executive lead of the Prosperity Co-Laboratory for the UK, supported by the data team and by the Citizen Science Academy. And I think this work is a standout contribution that UCL is making and will continue to make to East London and to the prosperity of East London. It's a very long-term commitment. We're 10 years in, and we will be here in another 10 years. And I hope having a very different kind of conversation with all of you, where we have actually managed to get things moving along plausible pathways to prosperity. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us this morning. Please take away all these wonderful zines that we have written by citizen social scientists. Use all the QR codes, read our reports, be part of us. Link to Seriously Different, which is our newsletter. Sign up, follow me on LinkedIn, do anything you like, but please, please keep in touch. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Good morning.